Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. He'll be fine now, Sakura said in a soothing and firm voice, steering the distraught young woman towards the door. I'll keep him for another hour for a second healing session and you'll be able to take him home. She looked at the young father who had not budged from the bed's side, his shoulders stiff, expression drawn and very worried, so touchingly vulnerable, as he looked down at the now sleeping, black-haired 3-year-old little boy. Sakura had long lost hope that she would ever see that sort of expression so openly on this face one day, something to prove loudly and unequivocally what Naruto already knew and never gave up on, when everybody else, including herself, had turned away, something which had always been there but had been momentarily smothered by darkness and hidden behind a tight, shuttered shell, that he was, despite everything, still human. She could not help the small warm smile creeping up her lips. Come, Sasuke, she insisted in a low voice. He's sleeping now. Many hard skeptics would have sneered that he was only concerned about his clan resurrection, nothing more, but what Sakura had seen in those anguished eyes was nothing to do with clan. It had everything to do with the little boy as an individual. His son. Maybe I should stay, started Uchiha Tsuki, the pretty black-haired, gray-eyed wife of Sasuke. Sakura shook her head resolutely. Your staying here won't change anything. The medications will keep him asleep for now. Where is he? A concerned, distinctive male voice was heard, and in a flurry of maroon robes, the Hokage appeared at the door. Sakura-chan, I just heard that Koichi-chan underscore. He stopped in mid-sentence and scanned her form with a horrified expression. It's that bad, he choked out, pointing at her coat. Sakura's mouth was opened, about to admonish him to keep his voice down, but stopped at his horrified face and looked down to where he was pointing. To see her doctor coat splattered with blood, lot of blood. Oh, no, this is not Koichi's, she quickly assured the appalled blonde. I had just finished with an operation when they came in. Naruto sighed in relief. How is he? He asked, lowering his voice, having spotted the sleeping little boy within the room. He breathed hard at the sight of intravenous drip sticking in the small, fragile arm. He'll be fine, Sakura repeated again. Tsuki-san, Sasuke, let's go, she reiterated to the lingering parents. We'll come back in an hour for the second healing. Amy will keep a look on him. She pointed to her assistant, a capable med-nin who was arranging the drip stand closer to the bed. Sasuke reluctantly moved and Sakura herded the small group away from the room. What happened? Naruto asked in an undertone as they walked through the corridor into the wide entrance hall. Acute bronchiolite, Sakura replied quietly. Looking at his blank expression, she simplified, severely congested chest due to a viral infection and difficulty to breathe. Not wanting to distress the Uchiha couple further, she did not say that it could have been fatal, especially in view of Koichi's tender age. That morning, the two Uchihas had arrived at the hospital, frantic, Sasuke carrying his almost passed-out son in his arms. The 3-year-old toddler had been in an apneic condition, wheezing horribly and with a high fever. When Sakura had immediately scanned him for a first diagnostic, she had found a quite advanced stage of lung infection. Upon questioning of the parents, she learned that little Koichi had been harboring a cold since a few days and he started having some slight breathing difficulty during the night, which suddenly went worse in the morning hours. Not losing another second, Sakura had rushed the little boy to the treatment room and a full 2 hours of intricate treatment followed, where she removed the fluids which had accumulated in the lungs, curing away the infected bronchioles and dilating the alveoli so that the little boy would breathe easily. The treatment had taken longer than it would normally have, in view to Koichi's age. The two parents had silently watched the procedure throughout, both so visibly anguished, though Sasuke had tried to, unsuccessfully though, hide behind a closed facade. They both still looked shaken, seeing their pale faces, even if the danger was over and Koichi was now completely healed. Now, giving them a reassuring smile as they all stood in the hall where medics, nurses and patients buzzed about, Sakura said, let's go have something to eat at the tea house across the street in the meantime. You've been here since morning. It was past lunchtime and most probably the two parents had left without any breakfast in the morning. Sakura herself needed a break. The 2 hours emergency operation immediately followed by the 2 hours intricate treatment on Koichi were taking its toll on her. She needed a short rest and some food before restarting. Sasuke opened his mouth, his now brooding expression indicating a most probable forthcoming refusal, but Naruto firmly forestalled him and pulled him towards the exit. Sakura-chan is right. You both look like you really need a bite. He pointedly indicated the pale, drawn face of Suki. If Sakura says Koichi-chan will be alright, then it means he will be alright. A short meal break won't change anything. Sasuke sighed and wordlessly followed him. Please give me a minute, Sakura requested the three as she saw the group of medic nins awaiting her in the front office. She had to assign the group their workload for the rest of the day. The medic nins all snapped to immediate attention, respect and compliance evident, as the head stopped by them and proceeded to issue some rapid, precise instructions. Yes, Sakura-sama, was a chorused reply as she finished with her directives and they all dispersed for their allocated duties. Sakura made another swift stop by the front nurse station and rapidly issued another sets of instructions to the nurses on duty. I'll be at the tea house, she informed the head nurse when she had finished. You'll know where to find me if needed. Yes, Sakura-sama, the head nurse replied. The pink-haired remembered her bloodied coat, quickly shrugging it off, she handed it to one of the nurses. Could you please see to this? She asked and the nurse quickly nodded, taking the garment. The impeccable head medic, Naruto commented teasingly as she hurried to their side. She carried the role of the hospital leader so well, it was so fitted for her, that it felt she had always been intended for this aim. He felt the usual rush of pride at her achievement. Sakura only rolled her eyes at him and led the way. The tea house in question was a small structure made of wood and bamboo, serving tea and typical tea accompaniment snacks. It could be said that it operated as the unofficial hospital cafeteria, where the hospital staff usually hung about during their breaks. A full meal somewhere else would have been better, but seeing that they had only 1 hour, and Sakura doubted that the two Uchihas would be able to stomach a heavy lunch anyway, the snacks served here would have to do. They all stooped at the low entranceway to get in and found themselves in a simple room with limited decorations, a simple flower arrangement at the side and a hanging scroll on the wall, tatami mats on the floor and low tables which could accommodate up to 6 people per unit. The establishment leaned more towards practicability rather than ceremonial, what with having to serve a hurried clientele made mostly of medics. Sakura liked coming here in the rare cases where she had time for short breaks from her work. The snacks were delicious in the modest and quiet place seemingly far away from her medic duty concerns. A wonderful aroma of tea and warm snacks floated in the air, adding to the warmth and welcome of the place, a refreshing breather from the antiseptic smell that was typical of the hospital atmosphere. The owner himself, a small, smiling man, immediately came forward to welcome the group and directed them to a low table, losing no time in taking their orders. I never knew that a simple cold would have turned so serious, Uchiha Suki sighed a short while later. Their order, a large platter of steamed rice buns with varying sweet and salty filling and a large pot of piping hot tea had been promptly delivered to their table and Sakura proceeded to pour the tea in the 4 blue porcelain cups as they started to eat. I warned you not to go to the park the other day with those clouds looming, the Uchiha woman scolded her husband, gray eyes reproachful. They were both drenched by the time they returned home, she explained to Naruto and Sakura. To the astonishment and bemusement of two, Sasuke looked crestfallen and properly chastised. I'm glad I put my foot down concerning Akira, Suki shivered. Akira was their 1-year-old younger son, who, as Suki had told Sakura earlier, was being watched by her parents during this crisis. Kids are more vulnerable to respiratory infections, but they bounce back to health more easily than us, Sakura murmured, comforting. And with this frequent rain, we've been having a virulent flu virus circulating around. Will this leave any remaining lasting after effects on Koichi? Sasuke asked Sakura quietly. Sakura shook her head. He'll be completely fine after a couple of days. I've healed the infected bronchioles, the second healing is just for a precautionary measure. Naruto observed Sasuke closely. He seemed deeply troubled, more troubled than a simple viral infection, as Sakura's claim should have caused. What is it? The blonde asked the Uchiha quietly. You still look worried. Black eyes slid at him, visibly surprised at his astuteness. Sakura looked at both men then at Sasuke, and now that Naruto had mentioned it, it was true. At a first glance, Sasuke looked his aloof usual self, but a closer look showed that he still did not look fully relieved, despite her several assurances that Koichi would be okay. Even Suki was eyeing her husband in surprise. Only Naruto had been able to notice his unrest. But then, when it came to an Uchiha Sasuke, one Uzumaki Naruto had always been able to look underneath the underneath. The Uchiha remained silent a while before quietly saying, Itachi died from a lung disease. Suki gasped audibly while Naruto and Sakura stared at him, shocked. He had never given much detail about Itachi and their last encounter, and knowing that it was a closet better left unopened, Naruto had never pushed him into talking about it. Sakura frowned, immediately understanding the Uchiha's concern. Koichi's lungs are healthy and normal, she assured him. I can confirm that he doesn't have any congenital defect, at least, it has not manifested until now. This is a viral infection which has propagated and degenerated into such an extreme situation. Seeing the still disturbed faces of the two parents, she said, but, to be sure, bring him back in a week, I'll make some further tests. In fact, bring Akira too. It won't hurt to test him as well if there is any risk of genetical issues. Her eyes were strong and resolved as she looked at the couple and said in a confident and affirmative tone, Don't worry, our knowledge and know-how about medicine had progressed enough that we will be able to counter any problem in that direction, if ever it arises. Naruto looked at her proudly. She was being modest, because it was her knowledge and her know-how in the medical field had increased beyond bounds, and judging by the look Sasuke was giving Sakura, he was well aware about it too. You can be assured that Sakura-chan will do everything that will need to be done, he told the distressed Suki. Thank you so much, Sakura-san, Suki said tremulously. Sasuke did not say anything, but the silent bow of his head to her was eloquent enough to both Sakura and Naruto. Sakura shook her head. Please don't thank me. I'm only doing my job. It's my mission and obligation not to let anyone suffer from anything medically curable while under my treatment. Certainly not the children of third member of Team 7, for who they had spent so much of their life bringing back, both Sakura and Naruto thought. Naruto waved his hand briskly. Now, enough with the gloomy faces. Eat up. He gave the quiet male Uchiha a hard stare. And the position of Konoha military police force is still open, he said out of nowhere. I'm still waiting for the day when you would accept it. It seemed almost predestined. Naruto had always thought. The second Hokage gave the Uchiha control of the Konoha military police force as a sign of trust following Madara's betrayal, and he, the Rokudaime, want to do the same for his friend. Whatever others might say, without Sasuke's help, Madara would not have been brought down and the war would not have been won by the alliance. Naruto did not believe in the crap that Madara had sprouted about Uchiha being tainted blood and would always bask in hatred. Since his tender age, the blonde had always hated such type prejudices of inescapable fate. His strong belief, as he had told Neji during the Chunin exams, was that one made his own destiny, and Sasuke had proven him right when he had given his all and helped Naruto to defeat Madara in the end, going against the crazy older Uchiha's firm belief that Sasuke was only following his fate by carrying all the Uchiha's hatred within him. And as I've told you before, this is not a pity offer or an eyewash to keep the Uchiha in check and out of Konoha's governing affairs. We really need you, Naruto said quietly. He then narrowed his eyes at his friend. And rest assured, I'm not worried about any future coup d'etat that you or your kids would be planning on us. I and my future kids will be fully prepared to kick your and your kids in the case it happens. You know I have the strength to do it, so, be warned. Sasuke sent him sideways glare, still silent. Suki hid a chuckle behind her hand, the first smile since that morning. No offense to you, Suki-san. Naruto immediately turned to the Uchiha woman and grinned winningly. With you in the Uchiha family I'm sure it will not come to it. She and Naruto had always gotten along quite well and he knew the down-to-earth, strong woman could pull her weight whenever needed. On her side, Sakura had to fight a strange burning feeling slicking down her gut at the words of future kids. With whom exactly was Naruto planning these future kids? She thought, completely unaware of the scowl that had crept on her face at the image of some unknown woman mothering the kids of Naruto. Is everything okay? The quiet voice of Suki broke into her silent ruminating, while in the background, Naruto continued to cheekily harass Sasuke. Sakura gave herself a quick mental shake and smiled at the Uchiha woman. Oh, yes, fine. I'm just planning my work ahead. Sakura improvised quickly and joined in the conversation, pushing the strange burning and disturbing thoughts aside. Naruto hurried towards the laundry room, late already, the basket full of his dirty clothes heavy enough to indicate that he had delayed his laundry by some days at least. Good morning, Sakura-chan. I'll join you shortly, he called out as he neared the kitchen, glimpsing her busying with a pan on the fire as he reached the door. Something smelled good and he paused, sniffing the air appreciatively. It was Akemi's day off. Usually the housekeeper took Sundays off but she had requested for a weekday off this time, and from what he saw, Sakura was apparently cooking breakfast. Not that he had expected her to cook anything, he would have been fine eating an easy breakfast of cereal and fruit, same as her. Sakura-chan, you didn't need to, he said, standing at the doorway. She turned her head to look at him and waved him off. It's all right, I barely cook as it is, and I have a light schedule for this morning. Our inflow of the flu cases is tapering out and we don't have any emergencies. I can afford to have 1 hour delay. Talking about flu, Naruto's thought went to Koichi and Akira, Sasuke's sons. He was deeply relieved that the tests Sakura had carried out a week earlier on both children had proven to be negative for any congenital lung issue, though from what she told him, she had asked Suki to bring both of them for a regular, bi-monthly follow-up, just in case. He sniffed the air again. Whatever it is, it smells good. It's nothing fancy, just steamed rice, miso soup and tamagoyaki, rolled omelet. Eyeing his laundry load, she urged, hurry up, it will ready soon. Her cheek was smudged with what he assumed was miso paste, judging from what she had listed in the menu. It was nice to see something as mundane and domesticated as a miso smudge on her for a change, rather than blood and gore that was her usual case at the hospital. She had already reverted to her cooking but he still lingered on the doorway, the refreshing picture she made as she busied herself at the stove, in their kitchen, was so alluring that he could not help stalling a moment longer, enjoying the sight. She looked as at ease and in her element here as she was as the capable head medic nin at the hospital, he thought. Deciding he should better stop ogling at her before she caught him in the act, he deposited his basket on the floor and moved. That miso smudge was tantalizing him. She was startled by his sudden appearance by her side. What? Her eyebrows shot up at his stare. You have a smudge of miso on your cheek, he said, and before she could react, he raised his hand and trailed a slender, tan forefinger on her soft, silky cheek to wipe said smudge. She stared at him, momentarily wordless, while he casually looked for something to clean his finger with. He could not immediately find anything handy. Once upon a time, he would have simply wiped it on his own clothes, but he had to refrain from doing it now seeing that he was already dressed for office, and he was the Hokage, he could not afford to be sloppy. Shrugging and as if nothing, under the widening, green stare, he put the forefinger in his mouth and licked the digit clean. Wooden spoon suspended in air, Sakura felt stunned and simply gaped at him, still lacking words. Naruto raised a quizzical eyebrow at her wide stare. Get on with your laundry, she simply said finally, turning back to her pan to hide her warming face and missing the mischievous glint in his eyes. It had seemed so simple for him, she thought. As always, an impulsive, practical and simple solution to an easy problem. But she could not say the same for her. The sight of him licking the finger that had just brushed her cheek had felt so intimate. She still felt the trace of the shiver that had ran down her back as he did it, and her cheeks suddenly felt warmer. She was glad that he had already walked away. Grinning, Naruto picked up his basket and resumed his way to the laundry closet. It was unbelievable at how he could get under her skin now, and he enjoyed that small, minute power. But better not abuse on that power, not that it resulted in her bolting away, there was some boundary that he had better watched for carefully. Balancing the container on his hip, he opened the door. He calculated that the washing should be done by the time he finished breakfast, so he would be able to put them in the dryer before he left for work. A basket full of what seemed to be freshly washed and dried laundry, obviously Sakura's, stood within the small closet. Lifting it out of the way, she must have recently unloaded the machine. He gave a cursory glance at her things and was about to turn back to his own set when he paused. A tiny bit of a very unusual color peeking from the jumbled mass of her clothes caught in his eyes. A peak of bright yellow, looking very conspicuous, very atypical, like a roaring flag, among the usual white, pink, red, black, navy and gray that were the colors she habitually wore. Naruto scrunched his face in concentration, trying to think of all her clothing. As far as he knew, the past 2 months they had been married, he had never seen her wearing anything of that color. Not even her nightwear, because he had always seen her in the comfortable grays and blacks and whites warming sweats she had been wearing due to the chilling night. This bright yellow garment piqued his curiosity. The color was so unusual, so warm, summer type, he would have definitely remembered it. Was it an exotic dress he had missed? Not pausing to think, he plunged his hand in the pile and grabbed the small bit of peeking yellow and pulled. And stared blankly at the tiny piece of garment that came out instead of the bigger clothing he had been fully expecting. It took him 3 full seconds to realize what exactly he was holding in his hand. He almost dropped the thing in surprise. His eyes almost popping out of their sockets and his jaw hanging low, he stared at the utterly small and fragile piece of clothing that he had pulled out. He held hanging between his suddenly shaky fingers, a scanty, in an almost see-through silky material and with lace at the edges panty. Of a most unexpected and unusual yellow color. Limited as was in knowledge in such things, he had never imagined that they came in such colors. Almost of its own accord, his second hand came up and he held up the cloth properly by each ends, getting a full, better view of the garment. What does such a tiny scrap of fabric manage to cover? He thought, stupefied, his eyes huge with an uncontrollable male fascination as he stared at the sexy, feminine thing. Pervert, the word screamed in his mind, as he realized that he was ogling, with almost a nosebleed, at a feminine underwear. This was so like Jiraiya that for a moment, Naruto was horrified to think that he had finally turned out to be like his passed-away master, the one who he had always accused of being a big pervert. But it was not as if he was peeking at girls as the former Toad Sanin had made it a habit to do, nor that he made it a habit of rummaging through women's laundry to look for their underwear, the blonde desperately reassured himself. Heck, it was only because on his company habitation situation that he had come across a female laundry basket. And it was not as if this was for any random female. This was Sakura's. Sakura's. He gulped audibly, suddenly fully grasping the enormity of his finding. Sakura wore this. His imagination tried to fit this minute thing on Sakura and he almost got a heart seizure. He felt blood rushing through his head, and his breathing jammed in his throat. He felt more like a hormone-raging horny teenager than the 25-years-old adult that he was as he started and stared at the thing, his imagination running 100 miles per hour. Naruto. Sakura's call snapped him from his stupor and he blanched. If she even got wind of what he was been doing, it would be the end of him. This type of thing was what would guarantee him a painful punch through the walls across Konoha. No excuse would get him out of this fix. Too panicked to think properly and reacting on instincts only, he hastily jammed the garment in his pocket and jumped to his own basket, bending over his laundry to hide his face. Just in time, too, as the soft sound of her steps reached the doorway. Yeah, he replied back, voice too unsteady. He immediately chided himself. He proceeded to make a thorough job of transferring the dirty clothes into the machine, ensuring that his crimson face was hidden from her when she looked in the room. You're taking long, she stated. I'm almost done, he mumbled, not turning away from his task. She noticed her own basket. Oh, I'll take my lot to my room. Picking the load, she balanced it on her hip while she hovered over him. Naruto froze. Now he was trapped. How would he return it? Things were getting more complicated now that he would have to find a way to sneak it back to her without her noticing anything. And hurry up, the food will get cold. Yeah, I'll be there in a second, he replied, and she turned to leave. Cautiously, he turned to look around, and could not help but stare at her departing back as she walked away. His mind tried to conjure images of that piece of tiny scrap of garment on her, and he promptly felt his heart about to boom again. Naruto had his fair share of lusty fantasy moments. He was a healthy grown male with normal needs, after all, and since as far as he remembered, Sakura had been the one in his fantasies. But he realized that fantasies and imagination was one thing, but now to actually know what she wore under all that demure clothing she usually donned was another thing completely. From then on, he would surely always think of yellow. Are you all right? Sakura asked a short while later as they sat through breakfast. She was looking at him in concern. The first unusual thing was that he was quiet, most quiet than he had ever been during breakfast since their 2 months of living together. And his complexion was changing too drastically for her liking, sometimes paling, sometimes having a red, almost feverish tinge. She reached out and touched his forehead. Are you coming out with a fever or what? Oh no, I'm fine, Sakura-chan. He almost stuttered. It's just, a queasy stomach. Oh, the food is not good? She asked anxiously. No, of course it's delicious, Sakura-chan. Naruto exclaimed hurriedly and groaned inwardly. Not the best excuse to have come up with, he chided himself. In fact, he guiltily realized that he had been eating almost blankly, not taking the attention to appreciate the food. He took a deep, slow breath, forcing himself to snap out of this juvenile reaction, and to stop stealing looks at her lower body region when she was not watching. I'm fine, really, he told her again, pulling a grin to his face and set out to duly appreciate the food she had prepared. Later in the office, his fingers met the soft, silky garment in his pocket. He felt an even bigger pervert now as he carried it in his pocket. Like a fetish, he felt his cheeks warming up. But it was not as if he had much choice. Anyway, he tried to console himself. It had been impossible to slip it in her room that morning while she was still about. He would have to do it during her absence. Meanwhile, this thing had got him immersed in crazy, wonderful fantasies. Feeling like a hang-worthy criminal, he looked around quickly, checking that his door was properly locked and removed the garment from his pocket, admiring the delicate, utterly fascinating thing once more. He still had difficulty in pinning his wandering thoughts a while later as he sat with part of his team for the weekly meeting on security. It was a good thing for him that there was nothing much to report, and only part of his team was there. Sai, his chief secret ops, Neji, his chief of defense security, and Shikamaru, Kakashi, his advisor, was absent on that day, making it more of an informal meeting, otherwise he would have been in trouble. They had almost finished when they were joined by Kiba. The Inuzuka had come to submit his mission report and wanted a discussion with the Hokage about importing an endemic mineral from the rock country. Said mineral, in powdered form, had the virtue of efficiently curing canine fleas, infestation and enhancing fur health, and seeing that the Inuzuka clan had the largest pack of canines in Konoha, he wanted to be able to import the mineral in a regular capacity from the rock country. Feeling that the other's opinion would help, Naruto had asked them to stay. Barely 15 minutes through the discussion, though, Naruto felt incapable of giving his full attention to what was being said, tried as he might. What do you say, Naruto? Shikamaru asked, and Naruto jumped, having no clue what he was being asked about. What? Shikamaru gave an exasperated sigh. He, same as the others, had noticed that the Rokudime had been particularly distracted since they had started. The treaty. I said, the best way to arrange for the mineral trade from Rock Country would be via the already existing trade treaty. Yes. Yes, the panty would be the best way. A screaming silence followed. Did I say, panty? Naruto stuttered, chuckling nervously. Yes, you did, Neji replied, deadpan. I meant treaty. Treaty. Slip of tongue. Sorry, let's continue. Man, that was quite a slip, Kiba snickered. Naruto glared at the Inuzuka. Let's get on with the discussion, he gritted. Another silence followed, as the others tried to refocus on the topic that had been discussed. Then, it's all right to be interested in one's wife's panty, Sai said calmly, matter of fact, as if discussing about the weather. Sai. The Rokudime spluttered. That's not. I was not. Can we get back to the discussion? Another blank silence followed. Did you know that they have them in yellow color now? Naruto finally blurted out. Yellow. And there's this fabulous hot pink one. Kiba immediately replied, enthusiast, with black frills at the edges. It's from the Secrets, the lingerie shop that had recently been opened. They have the hottest collection ever. Sai nodded. They are good. I like the one with monochrome abstract prints. White background, black prints. It's nice. Shikamaru sighed. Troublesome. In his case, these days he had to do with comfortable one rather than seductive one, but they were still sexy, he thought. Their red collection is hot, he said. Especially the one with the lace in it. 4 pairs of eyes turned to the one who had still not put an input. Well, I prefer the plain black. No trims, Neji stated calmly. A week later, on a heavily rainy afternoon, Naruto and Sakura sat at the kitchen table, both sipping a cup of hot tea, while Akemi, their housekeeper, cheerfully bustled about, preparing dinner. The weather a definite must for being inside one's home's warmth, the thick, dense raindrops clattering against the wide glass bay, creating a nice pitter-patter sound. Both of them had finished work early and had rushed back home. I would love a slice in my tea, Sakura suddenly announced, and Naruto froze. Yellow. He groaned inwardly. Would he always be haunted by yellow now? He thought, tortured. Fortunately for him, the very afternoon of the laundry incident, he came home earlier than her and had managed to sneak in her room, almost regretfully putting the garment back in the laundry basket which she still had not sorted out, to his great relief. Easy and done. But it seemed that yellow would always evoke hot images in his mind now. Sakura was already standing up and going to the kitchen counter to take a pulpy yellow from the fruit basket. She had changed from her work clothes earlier and now had a knee-length gray tunic-style sweater worn over black leggings, and Naruto found his eyes irresistibly drawn to her lower back, following her movements as she moved about and finally stood still to slice the fruit. He was playing with fire. He knew, she just had to turn around and he would be caught. But his eyes simply could not follow the alarm signals that his brain was trying to give them. Most probably under normal circumstances, he would never have noticed anything, but since his perusal was quite intense, he suddenly squinted his eyes in concern. Sakura-chan. He was immediately by her side, anxious. You are hurt. What? You're back. You have blood. Sakura immediately twisted her neck around to have a look, and stilled, mortified. No, I'm not hurt. I'll be right back. She practically ran away from the room, leaving him perplexed at her lack of concern. Not hurt. But you're bleeding, he called out, worried, but she was already gone. He immediately made a move to follow her when Akemi's dry voice stopped him. Hokage-sama, she's not hurt. It's just the monthly womanly thing. The middle-aged woman rolled her eyes at his obliviousness. Blank look then cleared and comprehension settled. Oh. Naruto scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. Yes, he had been told about birds and bees and womanly monthly thing by Jiraiya, long, long years ago. It did not mean that he was used to it or would recognize it, having never been exposed to such incident or discussed it with a female before. Sakura felt highly embarrassed as she hurried towards her room, which was ridiculous. They were adults. Very much grown-up adults and best friends, and she was a medic nin, for crying out loud, such types of things should not be embarrassing for her. Still, it was. She sighed. It was a setback of sharing living space with another person, the loss of some of the privacy, despite all the efforts they might do. Such type of things would have been bound to happen in the next couple of years that they would live together, she consoled herself. When she returned back to the kitchen a short while later, Akemi was nowhere in sight, most probably busy doing something else in the house while the food stewed slowly on the stove. An awkward silence reigned as she took her seat. Does it hurt? Naruto broke the silence, pure male curiosity on his face, and Sakura cringed, having expecting something in this direction from him. He was Naruto, after all. Curious and oblivious still formed a huge part of his character. And having had no feminine presence in his life, his curiosity was to be expected. She shook her embarrassment away and adopted an adult, doctor stance. Well, there are the cramps in the lower tummy region, ranging from mild to acute. She tried to reply as best and simply as she could to his incoming questions. That's a lot of hassle for you girls to go through, he said finally. Well, it's necessary for babies making, she chuckled dryly without thinking. Then she froze, and immediately berated herself mentally. Of all the things to say, why should she have said this? She chanced a glance at him and met cloudy blue eyes. I mean, you know, the technicalities of it, without it there could not be. She floundered to a halt, squirming in her seat as she buried herself further in her flustered hole. Yeah, his voice was gruff, and for once, he too seemed to run out of words. Already his mind had been sizzling with yellow, and now, another electric silence followed. Under normal circumstances, it would have been all right to discuss about all this, her being a medic nin and they being close friends and so on. But suddenly, their differences were so tangible. She, female, him, male. Autumn slowly faded away to the approaching winter, the days getting shorter, colder, and blearier. On a Monday morning of the first week of winter, Sakura groggily cracked an eye open to her still dark bedroom. Squinting at the small clock on her bedside table, she groaned and hurriedly pushed the blankets off her. She had overslept and she was going to be late for work. She had an important staff meeting scheduled first thing in the morning, and it won't do that the head herself was late. The previous night, she and Naruto had been to her parents' house for dinner, a fortnightly thing they made a must-to-do. It had been late by the time they had managed to leave, what with her parents' usual pampering and fussing over both of them, thus her oversleeping this morning. She shivered as she swung her feet off the bed, the chilly draft of the room biting into her skin despite the heater. Still feeling drowsy with sleep, she made an attempt to rush, jamming her foot in her fluffy slippers, shrugging into a thick fleece robe and collecting the clothes she would need to change into for work, and almost stumbled out of her room. A quick shower would surely wake her up, was her sleepy hazed thought as pushed the bathroom door open, only to stop abruptly. Sakura-chan, Naruto. They both talked at the same time. Am I too early for my turn? Naruto frowned. Hair tousled, blue eyes looking as sleepy as hers, clad in only in orange boxers, he looked questioningly at her while straightening from his previously bent posture over the sink, face drenching wet. He had been washing his face. Sakura was too busy staring at the vast amount of tanned skin exposed and subtle play of the muscles as he had straightened up, and she did not reply immediately. Then realizing that she should say something, not just stand there like an idiot, gawping at him, she responded, No, I overslept and I'm the one who's late. The arrangement for the morning use of the bathroom was she got the first hour, as she was always the one up earlier of the two, and up till now, it had worked perfectly well. The fleeting thought that she should be berating him for not locking the door crossed her mind, but she felt too strangely whacked to do so, and had been any other time of the day, she would have knocked by precaution, but she had been too sleepy to think properly. But now, her sleepiness had disappeared, she was suddenly buzzing awake. She slowly started to back away, tightening her grip on the clothes she held in her hands lest that her suddenly nerveless fingers released them. Hey, it's all right, stay here, I can use the guest bathroom, Naruto immediately proposed, his bare feet noiseless as he stepped towards her, more smooth bareness under her perusal now. A tiny drop of water flowed from his chin to his neck and mesmerized, her eyes was already following its trail down to his throat and onto his chest before she realized what she was doing and jerked her attention back to his face. It's okay, I'll use the guest one, she countered. It was the first time in their 3 months marriage that their schedule had slipped and it was her own fault, so it was only fair that she get to use the much smaller and less equipped guest bathroom downstairs. Naruto raised his hand to push a few rebellious blonde bangs away from his eyes and her gaze was directed at his shoulders and biceps, muscles rippling smoothly under the skin and a breath silently caught in her throat. No, I'll underscore, he started. No, I'll go, she insisted, cutting him off, because she suddenly felt that she should insist, she should say anything, and it should be something that did not sound too nonsensical, as she tried to get her suddenly fuzzy mind to work coherently. Her overrated reaction to his scantily clad form was quite unexpected to her. It was certainly not the first time that she had seen Naruto so sparsely clothed. She had occasionally seen him in equally little clothing since as early as their genin days, during training, during major treatments. But as her eyes, as though having a will by themselves, skimmed over the wide but not too overly wide shoulders, the powerful but still slender enough chest, the hard-packed but not too showy abdomen, down to the flat, taut stomach, all enrobed in the wonderful, smooth tanned skin of his, she thought, again as she had been doing the past years she had seen him grown, that he was no more a lanky boy of their childhood days. And this was neither an open-aired training ground, nor a cold clinical hospital where hundreds of people bustled closely about. But most importantly, she was no teenager now, no insouciant, oblivious girl. She was a woman, and although she had never really realized it until the past 3 months of their living together, her awareness of her best, idiot of a friend as a man had been getting much deeper, and judging from the way her heartbeat had speeded up and the soft hair at her nape seemed to stand straight, her reactions that much stronger. Unbidden, her eyes continued their journey down and she suddenly froze. A warm heat flushed through face and she jerked her eyes up, to be arrested by dark blue. Mumbling something unintelligible and giving him no time to reply, Sakura almost fled. Huh. Naruto looked bewildered at her hurriedly departing back. He lowered his eyes to where her gaze had been last directed and saw a telltale tent there. Oh, he scratched his head. His boxers was an old one, very much worn weary and quite a tight fit, not helping in the matter here at all. Was he supposed to apologize about it? But this was morning wood, and it was beyond his control. He shrugged to himself, confused, but he had to admit that he liked her flustered reaction and a slow, smug grin tugged at his lips. Now that he was properly awake, looking back, he realized that she had been acting quite peculiar, so unlike herself. Had she been checking him out? He suddenly wondered, eyes widening, mind speculating, feeling suddenly very, very interested. He decided to check his theory the very next day. Good morning, Sakura-chan. Naruto cheerfully greeted as he strode in the kitchen for breakfast the next morning. Having just barely settled on her chair herself, Sakura turned her head to greet him back and did a double take, while Akemi, who had been laying the food on the table, immediately gasped in concern. Hokage-sama, you will catch your death in this freezing temperature. Cool as he might, almost as if nothing, Naruto wore an old pair of fitted orange knee-length shorts which rested snugly low on his slim hips, and nothing else on top. Sakura stared wordlessly at him, her eyes running an automatic swift scan of his form before she could stop herself. Nah, Akemi-san, I'm not cold. Naruto was waving the elderly housekeeper's concern off. I was training for Sage Mode, and it's easier and quicker to gather natural energy with less clothing, he told the obviously lost civilian woman, who had no clue about ninja and sage techniques. Naruto was saying the truth, in a way. His start of the Sage Mode training in Myobokuzan had been obligatorily topless, though of course since then he had mastered the technique and did not need to be unclothed now. But he need not give this information to his audience. I thought I was already too late for breakfast, so I hurried here straight away, he added while Akemi mumbled about the youth of today who lacked concern for their health as she got back to her things. Sakura had almost buried her face in her bowl of cereal. It was correct that Naruto had always seemed to be more immune to low temperatures than the rest of them, it must be the Kyuubi within him. But still, what the hell was he thinking, parading around topless like that, 2 days in a row now, she ruminated to herself. It was freaking winter and freezing cold, for God's sake. Almost scowling, Sakura mentally cursed idiot sage ninjas who needed to train bare-chested and be such troublesome distractions. She was feeling so queer these days and not quite herself, and she did not like the lack of reign over her own mind at all, and she had a bad restless night full of disturbing dreams. She braked her mental ramblings and took a discreet calming breath. Not looking anywhere else from her bowl, she concentrated on pouring milk in it, psyching herself not to look, even send her mind, towards the expanse of skin and muscles under display. It was just Naruto, she chided herself, her familiar, comfortable Naruto. She managed to get a grip on herself and was quite proud with her cool, collected composure, busying herself about preparing her cereal, not appearing affected at all by the sight. Still standing, Naruto carefully spied on her at the corner of his eyes, noting how she was avoiding looking in his direction. Time to push up the pressure, he thought. Ah, he gave a loud, contented sigh. Wary, veiled green eyes rose almost furtively towards him. Nothing beats a good training first thing in the morning. He enthused brightly and lazily stretched both arms high above his head, rotating his torso to and fro to pop some bones into place for good measure. And caught the immediate pink tinge that appeared on her cheeks. Bingo, he thought in triumph. Padding silently to the table, he pulled a chair out. Akemi-san is right, Sakura suddenly snapped and making him pause as he was about to sit down. It's too cold, and now that you've done with your training, there's no need to freeze yourself to sickness. She refused to be subjected to more of this mind endurance. In her current state of mind, she could only tackle small doses of a topless Naruto. She did not have the mental stamina right now to go through the whole breakfast having to pretend to be indifferent and unaffected. She would surely end up making a fool of herself. You'd better put something on before I have to drag your hypothermic self to the hospital. But the heater is on underscore. He started to protest, but she narrowed her eyes threateningly. All right, I'll be back in a second, he relented, hiding a smile of triumph as he left the room. It was good to know that he was not the only one struggling with a massive physical awareness issue, he thought. No way, Sakura said firmly, and Naruto's face fell. But, Sakura-chan underscore. No, she refused categorically. This thing was hideous. She knew only too well that some people could have a bizarre penchant for such unorthodox colors, but to actually wear something as screaming as this. No way. She had to almost shade her eyes, so bright was the pure orange suit that he was waving under her nose. And who in their right mind would have designed a tuxedo in such a lurid color? She proceeded to ask the salesman, who was anxiously hovering a few steps away, the question. This was custom made for a stage performer, the young man nervously replied, quite in awe that the Hokage and his wife were shopping at his shop. Earlier, she had been in Naruto's office to submit and discuss about some reports, when he had informed her about an invitation for both of them to the opening ceremony of a bank, which was to be for the next day. The event was to be a formal evening affair, and Naruto had been invited as the guest of honor and expected to give a speech. Upon prodding, She had learned that he did not have anything really appropriate as formal evening wear, and when she had urged him to get something, fast, he had requested her help in the matter. It was a terribly busy day at the hospital and she could only spare an hour. Thus, here they were, for a hurried, impromptu shopping spree, in a men's shop, browsing through the array of displayed formal suits, with Naruto excitedly waving this ridiculous suit. There's something called too much of orange, Sakura told the long-faced blonde, quickly flipping through the stand of hanging suits and finally selecting one. Here, try this one. It was black and beautifully cut. But black so boring, he complained and she rolled her eyes in exasperation. Just try it on. The fit was perfect. Even Naruto had to grudgingly agree that it looked great when worn on and accepted to take it. The salesman immediately brought the matching pants in Naruto's size. And now the shirt, Sakura said as she walked to the shirt section. An orange one, Naruto said hopefully, but she handed him a crisp white one, with a wide, pointed collar. After much haggling, the white shirt was added in their shopping pile. The tie brought another argument, Sakura pushing for a cerulean blue one, in exactly the same shade as his eyes, though peculiarly, she did not tell him that, and Naruto, without surprise, doing a tantrum for a bright orange one. Finally, Sakura thought of a solution. She had a quick, whispered discussion with the salesman, who immediately nodded and disappeared at the back of the shop, taking the blue tie away with. The salesman agreed with the Hokage's wife choice. The blue tie suited the Hokage more, and he was impressed that she had managed to find such a compromised solution to please his taste of orange as well. A while later, he returned with a slightly transformed blue tie. He had stitched a strip of orange silk ribbon near the base of the tie. Here, now you have your orange too, Sakura told the surprised Naruto. As he still looked a bit crestfallen, she said, not quite meeting his eyes, I like the blue. He immediately put the blue tie on their shopping pile without any further complaints. A pair of black formal shoes later, they were out of the store and she hurried to work, having gone past her 1 hour. The next afternoon, Sakura stood in front of her wardrobe, biting her lips and grimacing as she looked at her own quite meager selection of formal clothing. As the wife of the Hokage, she was expected to dress up for the occasion. She really needed to do some formal dress shopping herself, she thought, but she simply had not had the spare time, and right now it was too late to be thinking about it. She had to find something appropriate and she did not have much choice but to forage something from these. The opening ceremony was due to start in less than 1 hour, and if she did not hurry up and made a decision they would be late, she growled to herself, and grabbed the only dress she found to be most suitable. She unzipped the plastic cover to look critically at the dress in question. She had worn it only once as bridesmaid for Ino's wedding. It was pale lilac in color and in taffeta silk, very simple in style, sleeveless, heart-shaped neck, floor length with a straight, tight fit and a knee-height slit on one side for ease of movement. It would have to do, she thought. It was more suited for a warmer temperature. Ino's wedding had been a spring one, so she would throw in a shawl for warmth, and she had one just appropriate for it, a pale golden, crocheted affair. She just hoped that the venue would be heated enough, otherwise she would freeze to death. At least the dress was perfectly creaseless, she was too short of time to iron it. She had tried to free herself at an earlier time, but as usual, Murphy's law seemed to apply to her and just when she needed to be early home she had been retained by an emergency. 30 minutes later, which included a quick shower, she was almost ready. She had opted to let her freshly washed hair loose, brushing it till it shined luxuriously and gathered a strand on one side and pinned with the Sakura comb that Naruto had got for her. Her makeup was sparse, a light dust of eye shadow that deepened the color of her eyes and a shiny pink lip gloss on her lips. Now only remained for her to put on her dress and the high-heeled golden shoes and she would be done. She carefully slipped into the dress and congratulated herself about not having gained any weight since 2 years she had last worn it. The dress was still a perfect fit as she slid the back zipper up. Then, second later, she gave a loud curse. She was barely over halfway zipped up when the zipper got jammed, and by the painful tug in her scalp, it was her hair which had got stuck the thing. Damn, she muttered again, tugging at the zipper puller, trying to catch a glimpse at what she was doing in the mirror by rotating her neck as far as possible, but to no avail. And she had been careful about pushing her curls out of the way, too, she thought in a mixture of dismay and annoyance. She gave another jerk, but it only pulled harder at her hair and she winced, at the same time now worried that she would end up tearing the fabric altogether. She growled in frustration. Today was definitely her day of Murphy's Law. Thinking quickly, she concluded that she had not much choice, and a minute later, she knocked on Naruto's bedroom's door. Naruto. The door was immediately yanked open and Naruto looked down at her questioningly. Sakura-chan. He was in the white shirt and black slacks, the tie looped loosely around his neck. He looked at her properly and whistled. Wow, Sakura-chan, you look great. He looked up and down her form in open admiration and she felt her cheeks warming. I'm stuck, she said dryly, and turned her back to him. My hair got jammed in the zipper. Can you get it out please? She told him over her shoulder. At least the thing had been jammed up to a decent height, just above her bra line, she thought, thankful for small mercies, thus, only her upper back that was exposed. Naruto contemplated the partly exposed creamy shoulders and the smooth curve of the start of her spine encased in the pale lilac silk and swallowed. Oh, yes, sure. He peered at the stuck zipper and saw that it was a rather thick strand of hair which had been thoroughly enmeshed in the metal teeth. He fumbled with the thing for a while, without success, and his manipulation only pulled her hair harder and she gave a hiss of pain. Sorry. He immediately apologized. Maybe I should sit down. As it was, he had to bend his back at an awkward angle to have a good view at what he was doing. Without waiting for her reply, he walked back inside his room and pulled a chair close to his dresser table's lamp. Just cut the bunch of hair if it's too difficult, she said, following him inside. He sat on the chair and beckoned her closer. No, I'll do it, he said stubbornly, the ever I'll not give up man, and she presented him with her back once again. A strong, warm palm curved on her waist and pulled her back, closer to him, settling her in between his straddled knees, and Sakura's mouth opened in a wide O of silent surprise. Satisfied that he could now see better, his eyes being closer and at a better angle, Naruto released her waist. Don't move, he ordered as she had reflexively started to wiggle around in surprise. She stilled and his warm breath teased the skin of her exposed back as he shifted his head closer. She suddenly thought that it had been a very, very bad idea to come for his help. She should have just ripped the damn dress off and changed into, what? She thought, her sparse wardrobe flitting through her mind. Anything, sweatpants, a rag, anything, she countered, her breath blocked into her throat as his knuckles knocked softly against her back as he struggled with the damn stuck zipper. The acute awareness of his touch reverberated electrifyingly up and down her spine. She longed to be able to say something to break the silence, but her mind had gone blank and all she could think was how close Naruto was, and most disturbing was that she could so acutely feel him. She could even hear his slow breathing in the very quiet room but could not actually see him, making that all her other senses was on overdrive. Maybe you should just cut it off, she repeated finally into the empty air in front of her, needing to say something, anything. No, I'm almost done, he mumbled in her back. There. Done. He brushed the strand of pink, silky hair gently out of the way and he had a hard fight quelling the urge to bury his lips against that small expanse of silky skin. Carefully, almost regretfully, he drew the zipper up and tied the hook at the end. For one moment, they both stayed still, unmoving, his hand resting lightly against her upper back. Then Sakura moved a step forward. I'll be done in a second, she managed, appalled at the huskiness of her voice and turning to look at him only when she was at the door frame. Clearing her throat, she tried again. We'll be late. Naruto stood up. Yeah. His voice was equally husky and he nervously raked his fingers through his spiky hair. I'm almost finished too. The bank opening event was preceded by a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony at the entrance, conducted by Naruto with Sakura standing by his side and about 100 guests in attendance, before all the attendees were ushered inside the brand new building for a formal reception. The huge, spacious entrance lobby had been turned into the functions venue, black, gleaming granite on the floor, the front facade completely in glass and high ceiling, the typical high-powered bank premise, which had been transformed for that evening by being bare of any furniture, and decorated with a multitude of soft lights and grand flower decorations. Naruto had been whisked off by the host for the delivery of the opening speech as soon as they had set foot in, Sakura reassuring him that she would be all right at the apologetic look he had sent her over his shoulder. The function was a standing and circulating thing, waiters with trays of drinks and finger food snaking their ways among the guests. The crowd comprised of politicians and business jet set of Konoha and from all over the Fire Country, not the usual crowd with which Sakura was used to. She listlessly circulated about, the brief speech being over and Naruto still retained, making polite conversations whenever appropriate, and it was a pleasure to see the familiar face walking her way. Tsunade Shisho. Sakura greeted the former Godime. The older woman checked her former student up and down. You're looking great, Sakura. And how's the married life? She noticed a new light in the green eyes of her former student that had not been there before. It's been some weeks since they had met. She only worked at the hospital as a consultant capacity, so even though Sakura always found excuses to call for her, it was not often that they met. Going fine, Shisho, Sakura gave the usual reply. The brat looks real good, almost unrecognizable, in the suit, Tsunade remarked, smirking. There's just something about a man in a suit, isn't there? Following the older woman's gaze across the wide hall, through the crowds, Sakura could just glimpse Naruto and she wholeheartedly agree with the older woman. Naruto looked very distinguished, so very handsome in the beautifully cut black suit, the pristine white shirt a superb contrast against his tanned skin and the blue tie, as she had expected, bringing the blue of his eyes to prominence, the blonde spiky hair falling freely over his forehead. It was not the clothes but the man himself, though, who had been having a marked effect on her. The short walk from home to the venue had been quite testing, what with her senses still clamoring from earlier and her emotions all over the place. It had been hard to keep a neutral outward appearance and doing casual talk while being so aware of him, and she had been glad that it was only a short distance walk. He was now talking to someone, and as she watched he threw back his head and laughed, and her stomach suddenly flipped, like being in a free fall in a roller coaster. As if feeling her intense gaze on him, Naruto turned his head and green eyes met blue across the wide space. Sakura dragged her eyes back to Tsunade to keep up with what she was saying. How long since you've married already? 3 months. Tsunade was asking. 3 months 2 weeks, replied Sakura. As they chatted some more, Sakura's eyes roamed around, watching the people milling about, but it was as if an invisible, irresistible force was dragging them back to Naruto's face, where their gazes locked for a long moment before she managed to wrench hers away. The evening progressed and Naruto was always taken, always in conversation with someone or other as everyone seemed to have something to discuss with the Rokudime. And in spite of her best efforts, Sakura found her eyes often flickering back to him, with him always seeming to wait for her, their gazes lingering before one of them would have to look away. Grabbing a fruit drink from a passing waiter, Sakura swirled her glass, staring down into the reddish liquid, but she was so acutely aware of a whiskered face, blonde-haired, blue-eyed someone by that stage that she might as well have been staring straight at him. It was as if those fleeting eye contacts had imprinted an unnervingly vivid image of him on her brain, of a Naruto of which she were becoming more and more intensely aware of as the weeks and months of their marriage progressed. She swallowed. You weren't supposed to be gazing so into a man's eyes when you were just friends, she thought. Platonic, housemates only, best friend, their marriage was turning out to be much more complicated than she had been anticipating. Suddenly all boundaries seemed so blurred, the lines they had drawn seemed so fine now. What were they doing? Where were they going? She had no clue at all. She drank her fruit drink shakily, forcing a smile as she continued through the evening by circulating among the people, eating small canapes served by the waiters, all the while her mind perturbed, almost jarred, as if she had stumbled into the dark. It was over an hour later that Naruto finally appeared by her side, smiling brightly into her eyes, and she was more than ready to call it a night. Tired, Sakura-chan? He asked softly. She nodded, smiling back, basking in the familiar warmth emanating from his person. Yes. Can we go home now? The crowd had been thinning out already. He did not need to be told twice and went to take his leave from their host. Things were definitely changing, Sakura thought as they walked back home, quite tired, and this time, unlike earlier, a cozy comfort settling between them as they commented on the evening and the guests. I'm so ready for this little one to arrive, Ino sighed for the umpteenth time, 2 weeks later, as she carefully swung her feet off the exam table, her hand settled on her 7.5 months pregnant belly. Sakura chuckled. Only 4 weeks to go, pig. The young Nara woman was cranky and had been bitching about everything since she came in for her prenatal checkup. 4 weeks still seems so far away, the blonde complained. I feel like a whale. My hair feels so greasy and lousy, my skin is always blotchy. This belly is getting in the way of everything and I have to pee each minute. Can you see that I am walking like a duck now? Sakura rolled her eyes at her friend's incessant grumbling and helped her to a chair. Ino pig, you are as gorgeous as ever, you know it, so stop complaining. It was true, pregnancy was very agreeable to Ino. She was the perfect picture of a radiant young pregnant woman, her face glowing with health and vitality. I feel as good as an ugly duck. I'm sure Shika does not feel this way, teased Sakura, sitting down at the small table of the room and quickly jotting some comments on Ino's health report. Said man had not been able to accompany his wife this time, as he had been doing for all the appointments, having been retained in an urgent meeting. Well, he is not getting much of it these days, so I can't say. I'm so uncomfortable and exhausted, my back aches and I can't even have a comfortable sleeping position. It won't be surprising for him to find me ugly. Ino's voice trailed miserably away. Sakura looked at the dejected face and immediately stood up and came around to give her friend a comforting hug. Ino, you know that Shika adores you, she said firmly. A few weeks of abstinence won't change his love for you. Easy for you to say, Ino sulked as Sakura straightened. I'm sure you and Naruto are always at it, in all positions. Sakura turned pink at her friend's usual crude way of talking. Ino. Her words were creating images in her mind, images which were too much for her to handle. What? Come on, tell. He surely must be well endowed, isn't he? Pig. Inevitably, Sakura's mind went to what she had glimpsed, albeit clothed, the morning she had walked into Naruto in the bathroom, and she turned a deeper shade of red. She crossed Ino's keen, knowing eyes. The young Nara woman was not among the best interrogator for nothing, and if this continued any further it would not be long for Ino to find out everything. So like you not to share. The young pregnant woman pouted. Hey, I never prodded about you and Shikamaru. But I still shared with you. I didn't ask you to. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. It was Shikamaru, who had come to see his wife. Are you girls done? The young father-to-be asked. Is everything fine? Yes, we are done, a very much flustered Sakura hurriedly replied, handing the health report to Shikamaru. They are both doing great. Don't think I'm done with you yet, forehead. Ino warned, but Sakura was already pushing her out of the exam room, to find Naruto propped against the wall outside, apparently waiting for them. It was already late afternoon, and since Shikamaru had headed towards the hospital, Naruto had decided to accompany him to see if Sakura was finished for the day. Sakura-chan. His smile was the usual bright as he saw her, then turning towards Ino, Ino. How are you? And the baby? Yeah, I'm sure in all positions, Ino grumbled sourly, glaring at a startled Naruto. Naruto blinked. Huh. Bye Ino, Shikamaru. Sakura hurriedly grabbed Naruto's hand and tugged him away, not giving the Nara woman time to say anything more. Sakura had already walked several steps through the wide hospital lobby and Naruto lowered his eyes, to stare at their linked hands. She was still holding his hand and she seemed not to be even aware of it. She must be really preoccupied by something, he thought, feeling a thrill at the simple prolonged contact. His fingers curled and tightened around hers. For the simple reason of not wanting her to release him, as he knew she would, he did not question her about Ino's comment, or what had put her in such a condition, instead wordlessly set out to savor the so simple gesture and sensation of having her smaller, soft yet so capable hand interlinked with his. It was only when they reached the doors that Sakura came to the flustered realization that she was still holding his hand and Naruto was forced to let go when she pulled away. What was Ino talking about? Naruto asked much later after dinner that night. They were in the living room, both sitting on the high-piled, soft rug by the fireplace, their usual relaxing place, Sakura working on some scroll on the low table while he reclined in a cushion propped against the foot of the couch, just lazing. Sakura paused in her writing and groaned inwardly. Trust him to ask that question. She had thought he had forgotten about Ino's parting comment, seeing that he had not made any mention about all this time, but apparently she had been mistaken. She wondered whether she could plead ignorance, but looking at his quizzical expression, she knew she would be able to get out of this as easily. She sighed. She was just being nosy, she said evasively. He quirked an eyebrow into her chagrin, he did not let it go, as she had anticipated. Nosy? In what way? Reluctantly, she grumbled, she was poking about our life. Ooh. Blue eyes lit up in mischievous mirth. So that's what she meant by all positions, he chuckled. She glared at him, indignant and mortified at the same time. You find it funny. You're as bad as her, she accused. I felt so cornered. Thank God Shikamaru appeared at the right time because I would surely have made a blunder. Next she would have wanted to know about our preferred position. He flashed her a cheeky grin. Well, you could have gotten a bit creative. He winked and she blushed. Naruto, she growled. What? Nothing complicated in that. For you pervert maybe. Have you ever? Did you and Hisagi? The question fused out so unexpectedly that she jerked straight. She gaped, utterly disconcerted, at him. Even Naruto seemed surprised by his own words. What? No, she snapped, her reply automatic. She and Hisagi had not gone beyond the single kiss stage, their story had been so short, 1 week only. But she was incensed at Naruto's question. How could he have asked that? She was upset and offended. This type of question was not asked. Well, at least not in a normal conversation, it was too personal, only to be discussed with close friends. Close friends. Her anger deflated. Ino had asked her the same question when she had been going out with Hisagi and she had not feel as outraged as she felt now, so why was she so riled up with Naruto asking this same thing? Naruto was already feeling bad seeing her obvious discomfort. It was a personal boundary he had crossed and he berated himself. He had promised her not to cross any boundary and here he was, disturbing her with personal questions. I'm sorry, he apologized, genuinely contrite, all teasing having disappeared from his face. I should not have asked that type of question. But Sakura's anger was already abated. This was Naruto, and they were best friends. There should not be such inhibitions about personal questions. Come to think of it, they had never, ever talked about anything in the direction of each other's intimate life. It was strange considering that they had always been able to confide in anything else. It's okay, she said quietly and he gave a sigh of relief. But her curiosity was aroused and she in turn could not help returning the question. And you, have you ever? Naruto froze. He felt very, very doomed suddenly. Sakura stared at his strained face. Her eyes widened. You, have, well, I almost did. Once. Naruto did not know why he almost winced as he said it, as if he felt guilty or something. He looked at Sakura, unsure of how she would react. She seemed to have frozen, and for a second or two her expression was completely blank. Then her green eyes dropped to her scroll on the table. Almost did. Sakura felt unbelievably floored. She could not understand why she should be feeling so shocked. The image of Naruto being in any way as close as that with another woman, she simply could not fathom this fact. And she could not bring to ask herself why. Feeling his eyes on her, she forced herself out of her stupefied state. Oh, she only said as comment, feeling that she should at least say something. It was for my 22nd birthday, he said almost defensively, feeling the need to justify himself. Remember that the boys planned an out-of-town drinking night. She nodded mutely, not knowing whether she wanted to know, and at the same time, like a masochist, she felt the need to know. Well, they hired a geisha as my gift. It seemed sordid when he was telling about it, but Sayuri, the geisha they had hired, had been anything but sordid. She had been well educated, friendly and funny, and a graceful dancer, as she had performed a dance for the group, but he did not need to tell Sakura all this. I was quite drunk and the mood was very boosting, he continued as she did not say anything. The boys' jabs about him being the only 22 years old virgin male got to him, and he had thought, why not? At that time, he had thought, what was the point of holding out for, what? Sakura gave a casual shrug and a forced bright smile. Well, yeah, she said in a voice that matched her smile. That, I'm sure, must have been a much appreciated gift. Naruto visibly flinched. But finally, I could not get to it, he said quietly. When it had been time to actually get to serious things, he had backed out. Drunk as he had not been able to cross that step. But he had considered it, was Sakura's thought, and had been close to. 2 days later, they got one of the rare sunny day of that winter season, the air crisp, the sun warming enough for people to be enjoying the outdoor. Kakashi winced as he tried to move his right arm, convinced that his shoulder was dislocated. He also sported quite a few other bruises and bumps. Propped raggedly against the same tree trunk as him was Naruto, who looked even worse than him if possible, what with that terribly swollen jaw which had distorted part of his face and the black eye, and a deep cut, most probably done by a flying splinter of a rock, showing via the torn fabric of his pants on his upper leg, looking nasty and already turning an interesting shade of purple. The training grounds shared their pitiful state: upturned trees, cratered ground, cracked boulders. All this after only 1 hour of training. What did you do? Kakashi asked almost forlornly. Normally, he would never think about prying in the domestic affair of his 2 former students, but having been at the receiving end of the wrath of a particularly bloody mood kunoichi, he was beyond caring about minding his own business. It had to be the blonde's fault, he was sure. He was almost regretting having accepted the proposal of the young Hokage for a team training my foot, the gray-haired man thought. It had mostly been a get pounded to a paced by Sakura hour. Naruto grimaced, only to groan in pain as the simplest movement of his face hurt. She learned about my 22nd birthday. Ah, Sayuri. Both male winced as they watched the third male comrade receiving his share of training, the blonde and the gray heads moving in perfect synchronization as they both followed the high-arched trajectory of poor Sai being punched through the air to land 100 feet away, a silent ouch. In their minds as the black-haired secret ops captain crashed into the ground and remained unmoving for some long seconds. Again in perfect synchronization, both heads turned towards the source of their pitiful state, the pink hair billowing about her head, eyebrows jammed together in concentration, green eyes flashing and the glow of chakra slowly fading away from her tightened fists. The rules of their spar had been as usual. It had been a solo stealth and ambush, meant no pairings allocated, whoever fell on whoever sparred. And only basic ninjutsu and taijutsu was allowed, so, Naruto was not allowed into Sage or Kyuubi mode and Kakashi had not been allowed his Mangekyo Sharingan, but Sakura's chakra-enhanced punches and kicks had fallen into the basic ninjutsu, to the later dismay of the 3 males. She had been ferocious, seeming to have sprouted an additional surge in her already monstrous power and had set out to demolish their defenses and attacks and beat them, each in turn, to a pulp. And you brought us for sparring to be her punching bag, Kakashi mumbled accusingly, and Naruto mumbled an intelligible reply back. Kakashi had been the one to propose the idea of Naruto's 22nd birthday gift to the boys, and he quivered at the thought that Sakura getting to know about his role in that idea. But she could not know it, he consoled himself, otherwise he would have been in a much worse state. Thus, it was the team as a whole who got to face her wrath. Logical, he figured. A short while later, Sai managed to limp to them and dropped by their side. What got into her? Sai asked quietly, grimacing as he sat down on the grass. The other two did not have time to reply as the one being talked about walked in their direction. The three males watched their former female teammate almost apprehensively. Usually, if they were wounded during training, she would heal them on the grounds itself, but in her current dark mood it was difficult to expect any such thing. They all breathed a sigh of relief as wordlessly, she removed her glove and brought the usual green chakra to her palms. She started with Sai's healing. Can we go for ramen afterwards? Naruto almost timidly called out from his place. She gave an unladylike grunt, leaving him to debate whether it was a yes or a no. Next she moved to Kakashi. You're getting old, Kakashi-sensei, she remarked, feeling a tad guilty as she healed his dislocated shoulder. Kakashi made a face. I would say that you are getting stronger, Sakura. A short while later she was done with him and Kakashi immediately got to his feet. We'll wait for you two at Ichiraku, he said, then he and Sai blurred out of view before Sakura could say anything. She finally turned to Naruto, who was still propped against the tree trunk. She moved to kneel in front of him and set to work. As expected, most of his less serious bruises and cuts had already been auto-healed, so she started with the cut on his leg, which took only a few minutes of her healing chakra. Then she got to his black eye. Focusing only on the black area and not on the blue orbs that was watching her, she set to work, and a few minutes later, it was as good as new, with only a trace of redness around. Next was his swollen jaw. She felt relieved to note that it was not broken, and her green chakra started to work on the bruised flesh as she hovered her palms over the swollen area. All the while, blue eyes surveyed her as she silently concentrated on her task, her face so close that he could see each individual pink, long eyelashes which curtained her eyes from view. Are you still angry? He finally asked in a low voice. She had been distant to him the 2 days since their discussion, and he could not bear her aloofness any longer. He much preferred that she punched him to a pulp rather than face the cold treatment that she had been giving him. Along all this, not for 1 minute had he questioned the why and the validity of her upset, that had come down to be irrelevant. He took comfort in the fact that she was angry, that she had taken the right to be upset. Sakura pursed her lips, green eyes burning up to his and shook back her long, pink tresses in an achingly familiar gesture of angry exasperation. Why should I be angry? It was 3 years ago and it didn't mean anything, he insisted softly as if she had screamed, yes, I'm angry. I'm not angry, she refuted again, the way she lifted her dainty nose in the air and glared at his jaw as get back to her belying her words. You were free to do what you want. He noted her use of the past and did not comment on it, only accepting it with a thrill at what it meant. Sensing that she was about to be done with his jaw, he moved his face the half-inch needed forward and a slight angle downward, and planted a soft kiss in the center of her palm. Green eyes widened at the soft brush of his lips and she felt a tingle running up her arm. She looked up to meet his eyes, blue and serious, the sunny blonde spikes falling over his forehead. For one moment they stayed still and time seemed to have stopped. Then, before she could react, he was already scrambling up. I'm not done with healing you yet. Sakura protested automatically, but he smiled down at her, his usual, warming smile. I'm not hurt anymore, he simply said and held out his hand to her. Sakura felt all her dark mood of the previous 2 days melting and she realized how much her sour behavior had been unfair and uncalled for. Her eyes finally warmed as she took the offered support and he pulled her to a stand. An angry Naruto stood looking out the window of the Hokage office, the details of the village below barely registering in his preoccupied and dark thoughts. Shikamaru and Neji, the only two still present from the Hokage team, sat in front of Naruto's large desk. The mood in the room was as grim as the winter evening's weather outside. It was in times like this that Naruto really felt the restrictive limitations of being the Hokage. He wanted to be out there in the field, turning all rocks and searching all crooks to find those who were responsible for what happened, not helplessly standing so in his Hokage tower. I won't let this pass, Naruto said in a somber tone. Whatever it takes, we'll have to find those who did this. Shikamaru sighed. They were all of the same state of mind and opinion. Naruto did not need to say it. We should be getting the second set of reports by tomorrow morning, he said to the back of Naruto's head. They had just concluded the first and initial field report meeting. The Hokage's office as well as all the main departments connected to the running of Konoha had been in a major uproar since the middle of the previous night, when a full platoon of 2 Junins and 6 Genins, all in terrible wounded and near-death state, had been brought in by some patrolling guards. 2 patrol guards, who had been in their usual Fire Country border patrolling duty, had tumbled upon the whole team of 8 shinobis in a near-comatose state late afternoon the previous day. The 2 guards had immediately called their other nearby colleagues for reinforcement to urgently transfer the injured back to Konoha, which had taken about 4 hours, arriving in Konoha near midnight. While the 8 shinobis, 5 males and 3 females, had been sent straight into intensive care, Naruto had immediately called in for an emergency meeting with his team. Among first things, upon checking with the records, it was found that the 2 teams, each consisting of 3 Genins and 1 Junin teacher, had been paired together for a simple C-rank mission to help out a small village that had been severely afflicted by a fierce snowstorm, village which was found near the border of the Fire Country and Rock Country. An immediate reconnaissance Anbu team, under Sai captainship and their best trackers from the Aburame and Inuzuka clan had been immediately dispatched to investigate and gather as much information as possible. The first field investigation report Naruto had received an hour ago had not been much informative on the attack itself. No clue had been discovered on the site where the group had been found, no trace of chakra signature, any prints or blood, nothing. The first findings and conclusion that Sai and his team had reported was that the group had been transported to the discovery place and the actual attack and fighting had been somewhere else. They had also learned that the teams had completed the mission 4 days ago and had set out for the 3 days travel return to Konoha on that very day. Now, it was way past sundown, almost 20 hours since the injured shinobis had been brought in and as at yet, they had not been able to obtain any statements from the victims. All the 8 of them had been unconscious and all the time under intensive treatment. The last report received some hours earlier from the hospital had brought bad news and had been what had set the dark mood over the young Hokage. They had lost 1 man, one of the Junin teachers. As per that last update, 6 had been declared as out of danger but still unconscious, the 7th one, a Genin, a young boy of 13 who had been in the worst state of all since the beginning and who, despite having been the first to receive treatment, was still in a critical state and still remained under intensive care. In the meantime, Naruto and his best men had been working out possibilities and suggestions, strategies on how to proceed and actions to take, but nothing could beat out the hollow feeling that was gripping Naruto. It hurt that he had lost a man in duty, it made him feel so utterly helpless. This was the first such incident under his Hokageship. Till now, he had been counting himself lucky that he had not lost any men in duty since he had taken the post of Hokage. All nations have been in peace since the war and there had barely been any such major disruptions, missions had been basically safe with no casualties. S-class missions had been sparse and few and had till now been successfully carried out. But with this attack, thus ended the short respite of peace and calm that they had been enjoying since the war. It had almost slipped Naruto's mind that being shinobis of a hidden village, deaths formed an integral part of their daily occupation and they were always putting their lives in frontline, and this attack on his men came as a rude awakening to their realities. There was no ignoring it, the attack was a direct attempt at Konoha. According to the hospital reports, The injuries inflicted to all 8 shinobis, to those young genins, had been purposeful, the goal a slow, inexorable, certain death. In a near-death state, but not dead. Then they had been calculatedly left in a place where the Konoha patrol's guards were bound to find them, and Naruto could only reach the conclusion that it was all a defiant message to Konoha. As for the question of who and why, Naruto and his team already had a small suspicion of who could be behind the attack, though he could not act on it yet, not without firm evidence. All their speculations led them to a small, newly established village called the Wheat Village, which had, since 5 years now, erupted on a no-man's land between the far end of Fire and Rock border, village which neither the Fire Country nor the Rock Country could lay claim onto and which was supposed to be farming-based. Konoha spies along with those of Suna had reported suspicious activities of some of the village inhabitants, most importantly, those of its leader and a small group of people. They believed that this group was knowledgeable in ninja arts and were making use of it by taking rogue missions, though always careful about hiding the facts so well that there were never concrete evidence on their activities. The reports had never been confirmed because the leader had always point-blankly refused to collaborate on any diplomatic missions from Konoha and Suna, and had always kept a too suspiciously low profile. The travel trajectory of the attack teams and the place where they had been discovered made the suspicion to be feasible they had been close enough to the Wheat Village. A soft knock broke into his dark musings and Naruto spun around to see his secretary at the door. The latest report from the hospital, Hokage-sama, the male Junin murmured, and deposited the file on his desk before leaving. In 2 strides Naruto was at his desk and picked up the report to flip it open and flinched in pain. They had lost the last patient, the 13-year-old boy. That made 2 men lost in battle. 2 men too many. Statistically speaking, seeing that all 8 of them had been fatally wounded with the clear aim of achieving a slow certain death, 6 out of 8 making it was already an astounding success. But in such case, Naruto could not help but focus on what they had lost. He wordlessly handed the report over to Shikamaru, who, along with Neji, had already guessed the outcome of the report judging from the paling face of the Hokage. Naruto balled his fists in anger. He was supposed to bring universal peace to their world. Many people had been counting on him for that, Nagato, Jiraiya, even Itachi. Ending and winning the 4th war had been the first step to achieve the peace, but now when he lost people like this, when he had a whole platoon of his shinobi wounded as sneakily like this, it made him question his success towards ever achieving that goal, as there would always be some group or organization who would threaten the peace. But he would never give up. He had taken the vow to protect his village, his people and peace, and he intended to do everything to find the culprits behind this. This is bad, murmured Shikamaru. Sakura, thought Naruto. Hers were an even darker and difficult plight right now. Having thus received the 8 men with the tiniest flicker of life still present, it was as if by an obscene, perverted intent, it had been left to her and her team to change the balance of life or death. Naruto knew she would have given, without a doubt and as usual, her utter all to save them, and still losing 2 would have been devastating on her. There was nothing more to be done in his office. I'm going to the hospital, he told the other 2, already at the door. Both immediately rose to their feet. Let's go, Neji said quietly. As the chief of defense security, he had already taken all precautions and the security around the village had been put on high alert. He had also increased the security effective around the Hokage's residence, and instead of 1 Anbu trailing the Hokage and his wife, he now had 2 for each, just in case. Unknown to Sakura, since her marriage with the Hokage, she had an Anbu constantly trailing her and stationed at the hospital wherever she was on duty. It was no-brainer that as the Hokage's wife, she was an as potential target as the Hokage himself, if not more, and it was up to Neji to ensure that she was given tighter protection now. Sakura was feeling devastated and completely drained. She was chakra depleted and was currently running on solider pills to keep her on her feet and still going, her last meal having been dinner the previous night, almost 24 hours ago. Her team had worked superbly, but she had taken the brunt of the work since most of the healing had been up to her expertise alone. Even Shizune could not have performed some of the treatments, and Tsunade was absent for the moment, being away for his short trip to the slug world. At the back of her mind, Sakura knew she had overdone it. The little coherent bit left in her was sending her warning signals about a danger of collapsing, but she felt incapable of doing anything about it and sat there, in the stunned state, the total exhaustion or the lack of food the least of her ailments right now. She remained seated on the wooden bench right outside the intensive care unit, where she had just lost her second patient of the day. A 13-year-old young boy. A genin, with a certain bright future ahead. She stared blankly at her feet for what seemed an endless time, not really aware of the busy and bustling medical staff around her. She had already submitted her report and technically, there was nothing more she could do right now. She did not have anything left in her to be useful and she should be off duty already. The relieving team of medics were already taking charge of the follow-up care now that the remaining 6 was out of danger. But Sakura still sat there, unmoving. Since years now, she had come to painfully accept that in her field of work, failure meant losing lives of her patients. She had learned, over the years, how much the wall between life and death was flimsy. It took a second to tear through it. She was realist. She had come to terms with the fact that she would not be able to save all the patients that came under her care. Such an idea would have been too arrogant of her. Had been among the first things Tsunade had told her when she had started her med-nin training. They were humans, after all, with limitations and not infallible. They were not God. But still, the wishful thinking, the pain, the despair, the helplessness and the utter guilt she felt had never decreased over the years. Always, after she lost a patient, which she must say she was lucky they were rare cases, Sakura had held the unforgiving sentiments that she had been too slow, her chakra had not been enough, the hands had not been adept and quick enough, wishing she had a jutsu which could turn back, or at least stop time so that she could erase the event and restart again, having the unrealistic wish for a second chance to do things correctly and saving the patients. The approaching soft steps didn't register in her darkly miserable thoughts. People had been milling about her without her seeing or hearing them. It was only after she felt someone shuffling close that she stirred and lifted her face to find Naruto standing in front of her. He lowered his frame and sat on his hunches in front of her, bringing his face level to hers. He was not overly surprised to find her in this dazed and hurt state. It was as he had been expecting. She had been like this the odd times she had lost patients during the past years. 25 years old, seasoned shinobi and medic she may be, but she was still soft when it concerned emotional matters, still hurt a lot when she lost patients. That was what made her Sakura. Sakura-chan, he said softly. Dulled green eyes looked into the comforting blue and equally tired and hurting eyes. 2 died, she said, her voice breaking slightly, but she steeled herself. It could not do for her to break now. She was the head medic and she should not break down. She thought about the parents and families of the 2 deceased and her heart twisted in pain. Wordlessly, Naruto encircled her shoulders and dragged her face into his chest. He silently held her. No words exchanged. Over the years, they had exchanged all the words needed in such cases to finally realize that sometimes words could be superfluous. As the Hokage, he was too aware of the pain of losing their people. As her friend, he was very aware of her hurt. He recognized her severe chakra depletion and near collapsing state. She had been in treatment incessantly since the near 20 hours the injured had been brought in. Every time he had checked in the hospital she had been in intensive emergency treatment, so it was no surprise that she would be thus exhausted. This was another thing Naruto found quite unfair. He had the famous immense chakra reserve and it was mostly not put into use, especially since all the nations were now at peace, whereas Sakura was always overusing her chakra almost on a daily basis, putting their people back to health and back to life. Mission or no mission, Sakura was always on full active duty at the hospital. Not releasing her from his hug, Naruto rose to his feet and slid one arm under her knees, and effortlessly swung her up in his arms. Sakura raised surprised though still bleak eyes to him, but his warm eyes soothed her. I can walk, she protested, her hands automatically going around his neck for support. Yes, I know you can, he said solemnly, but showed no signs of putting her down, and turned to have a brief talk with Shikamaru and Neji. The two were in discussion with Shizune, with a few other medics standing to attention and reporting in. I'm taking my wife home, the Hokage told the small group. Shizune nodded. I'll take over from here, she assured the Hokage. She had been able to take short break in between, contrary to Sakura. She needs to rest and recharge. Yes, I intend to see to that, Naruto nodded. We'll inform you in case of anything cropping up, Shizune told him. Sakura felt peeved that they were talking as if she was not present, as she lay there, held in the arms of the Hokage. But she had to admit that the word home evoked a safe and comforting feeling within her. Yes, right now she needed the haven of their home. We'll wrap up things for the time being until the next intel income, Neji said quietly. Naruto nodded. He had left instructions for the night shift on guard to inform him as soon as they heard anything in the meantime. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning then, he said, all the while Sakura tried to appear as normal as possible, being carried as if nothing, in Naruto's arms like that. None of the others found it strange and no one had batted an eyelash at the sight of the Hokage carrying his wife thus, and she was too drained to even produce a blush. She knew that words would not make him put her down, and she did not have an ounce of energy left to wiggle down from his arms, and truth be told, she just did not want to. Naruto turned to walk out of the hospital and swiftly made his way home, holding her preciously in his arms. Despite her near-collapsed state and her bad need of rest, Naruto knew that Sakura needed food foremost. He deposited her in her bedroom and briskly ordered her for a shower. Will you be able to manage by yourself? He asked. She nodded mutely. I'll see what we have to eat. Will you prefer to eat in your room? Sakura quickly shook her head. I'll be down shortly, she said. She needed to be mobile. Not doing anything was quite painful for the time being. Naruto nodded and left the room. Removing his Hokage robe on the way, he went to the kitchen and set about heating up the food which Akemi had prepared. There was steamed rice, chicken, stir-fry vegetables and miso soup. When Sakura came down a short while later, showered and wearing a pair of old sweats, Naruto had already set the warmed food in the low coffee table in the living room, and a fire was crackling merrily in the fireplace. He figured that she would be more comfortable reclined against the plush couch while eating, instead of sitting at the dinner table. Sakura did not have the stomach for food and made a motion to stop at only some sips of the miso soup, but Naruto was having none of it. You need to eat, Sakura-chan, he admonished, his voice brooking no argument and even going as far as to adopt one of the frowns she usually used on him when he was being difficult. So, she had no choice but to obediently finish the quite laden plate he had set for her. It felt strange, having Naruto mothering her like this when it had always been the other way round. She had always been the one to fuss and mother over him. They ate in quasi-silence, both of them not having the force to discuss the attack. As soon as she cleared up her food, Naruto stood up and piled the plates and bowls, waving away her protests when he refused her help, and disappeared to the kitchen. To bed now, he said firmly when he returned back, taking her hand in his with the intent of pulling her up, but she tugged at his hand. Could I underscore? She paused and swallowed. Could we sleep here? She asked in a small voice, not looking at him. Naruto stilled, looking down at her. She didn't want to be alone right now. The merrily crackling fire was soothing and the living room was much more inviting than her lonely bedroom. I would like some company, she said quietly. But she need not have justified her request as Naruto totally understood her need for comfort. In fact, he could very well do with some company too. Sure, Sakura-chan, he said easily. The thick sheepskin rug was plush and comfortable enough to pass for a thin bed and she could use the couch, her own green couch which she had brought from her apartment, which was as good as a bed. "I'll go get some blankets," he simply said and left. She had not budged an inch from where he left her when he returned back a short while later, her tired eyes contemplating the fire. He had taken a quick shower and changed into a pair of black pants and white t-shirt, carrying a set of blankets and pillows in his arms. Placing a pillow at the head of the couch, he gently steered her to lie down and drape the warm blanket over her form. "You're comfortable?" he asked softly, and she nodded. Under her tired stare, he set out to make some room for himself on the rug. "I would definitely have loved some of your strength," he chuckled as he finally managed to heave the heavy solid wood coffee table away from the rug, to a corner of the room. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, feeling useless, aware that he must be feeling as bad as her for their loss. But he immediately turned to frown at her. "Don't," he almost growled, his serious, narrowed stare chiding her. He walked to the couch and squatted next to her lying form. "Just concentrate on getting some rest," he murmured, running a forefinger softly over her brows. Sakura instinctively closed her eyes, the rough pad of his finger soothing on her skin. She felt bereft when he removed his touch and straightened. He spread a duvet on the rug for additional thickness, then arranged his pillow close to the couch, right below her head. After having made sure that the fire was well fed to last as long as possible through the night, he switched off the lights and came to settle down, lying parallel to the couch and arranging his own blanket over him. "Good night, Sakura-chan," he whispered. "Good night, Naruto," she whispered back. Barely a few minutes of silence later, he heard her stir. "Sakura-chan," he murmured, but she was already scrambling up. He immediately rose to a sitting position. "What?" Her blanket gathered haphazardly to her frame, she had swung her feet off the couch onto the floor and was gingerly stepping over him. His hand instinctively shot out to steady her as she seemed about to topple over him. Silently, she crawled next to him and settled down on the duvet. In the dancing light of the fire, he saw her green eyes looking beseechingly at him before wordlessly turning her back to him, snuggling into a comfortable position and burying into the tangle of blankets. Still in his seated position, Naruto stared down at her back, nonplussed. After a minute of indecisively looking down at her, he finally lay back down, his frame now a snug fit between the couch's foot and her own sleeping self. He rearranged the blankets over them both before settling down to a more comfortable position on his back. He hesitated for an instant, then thought, what the heck, they were already much against each other as it was, so, throwing cautions and boundaries to the wind, he turned on his side, facing her back and wordlessly encircled her waist with an arm. He pulled her to him and tucked her head under his chin. With a soft sigh, she snuggled back against him. They both needed this human touch. "Good night, Sakura-chan," he whispered for a second time that night. Her soft hair teased his chin and he took a deep breath, she smelled sweet and flowery. Not able to help himself, he dropped a soft kiss on her head. Almost immediately after, her soft, regular breathing indicated that she had fallen asleep. Holding his most precious person against his heart, literally, he followed suit soon after. It was semi-dark when Sakura drifted out of sleep, the fire down to some glowing embers by that time. Her first conscious sense was the feeling of being cocooned in a delicious warmth. Blinking some of the sleepy fog away from her mind, she realized that she was lying on her side with an arm over her waist. A hard, male arm holding her against the hard, warm male body behind her. Feeling disoriented at first, the recollection of the previous night flushed in her mind. Naruto. They were in the living room, sleeping on the rug. Last night she had been in bad need of comfort which he had very willingly, without question, provided her. 2 deaths. She still felt the remnants of the pain of not having been able to save the 2 shinobis, but it was not as bleeding and gut-wrenching as the previous night. In the light of the new day and the major of her bone exhaustion abated, she held the faith that she had done her utmost best. She had not let any loopholes, she had given her all to save the 2. She took a deep breath. The early morning winter air was quite chilly, but she was not affected by it as Naruto's body was wonderfully warm, acting like a furnace. A living, breathing furnace. And as she took more deep breaths, her nostrils were tantalized by his earthen and musky scent. Very male and very him. She could feel his warm breath, deep and slow, just stirring her hair, and it unexpectedly woke every nerve in her body. She remembered the soft kiss he had bestowed on her head just before she had passed out asleep. Without conscious thought, she carefully pulled back slightly from his one-arm embrace and turned her head to look at the sleeping man. She had to raise her face a bit as she had been tucked under his chin. His mouth was slightly opened as he breathed softly. The timid, almost non-existent light of near dawn fell upon his face, softening the angles and giving him almost a surreal appearance, the 3 whiskers marks barely visibly on his cheeks. Maybe because she was still not totally emerged from the haze of sleep, or maybe it was the first time that she was in such close, intimate proximity to him, and he was asleep, giving her the freedom to observe him without hindrance, she found herself thoroughly entranced, unable to look away. She felt her breath caught in her throat, her stomach flipping over. This was Naruto. Naruto's arms around her. Naruto's broad chest against her. Naruto's heavenly scent englobing her. Naruto's throat merely some centimeters away from her face. Despite her still lingering tiredness, she felt shaken and warm and blazingly alive, aware of every millimeter of her own body, burning where it touched his in a jolt which she recognized as desire zagging down her belly. She had this sudden, ridiculous longing to press her face into his throat, and it was a physical effort to stop herself from doing so. She swallowed. She had always felt so comfortable and safe, so at home, so familiar with him, and the sudden difference now was earth-shattering. His hair was in a jumbled spiky mess over his face, some strands falling over his eyes, and she had the urge to smooth them off his face. Her hand even reached out towards his forehead before stopping herself. This was such shaky ground, and she did not know how to proceed. She did not want to abuse what had started out only as a comfort act, it would only create room for awkward complications. Whatever it was, whatever was at the brink of brewing, she did not want it to stem from a need of comfort. So, keeping her hands to herself, she merely looked at him, studying the small details of his face. The tiny rational part of her was berating herself for staring when his eyelids trembled and moved open. Lazy, blue orbs blinked at her, trying to adjust to wakefulness. Her breathing stilled and her eyes widened despite herself as she was caught so blatantly staring, and she braced herself for whatever would follow. But Naruto lay motionless. Sleepy blue eyes darkened, looking down at the wide green eyes looking almost apprehensively at him. He became slowly aware of how their limbs were tangled. More importantly, how she felt so soft and pliant against him. So snugly and tantalizingly close. A warm, pure masculine pleased glint entered his eyes as he continued to silently survey her. She was the one who, flustered and needing to do something, broke the gaze and turned away from him, starting to wiggle off. But his hold on her did not loosen, refusing to let go. While still firmly holding her wiggling frame, though Sakura had to admit that by now she were not making a convincing effort, Naruto shot a sleepy glance towards the window. By the intensity of the light, he deduced it must be still somewhere around 6 a.m. We still have an hour or so more, he rumbled, his voice raspy from sleep, and she paused in her feeble attempts to get away from his hold. And before she could utter any reply, and maybe it was because he was still so sleepy that he did not ponder too much on his moves, he tightened his arm around her waist and firmly drew her closer against him, and shifted so that he was snugly spooned against her back, her head tucked firmly below his chin, back to how they've been when they set to sleep last night. But this time she was not exhausted to death. She was awake and totally aware, and her breath hitched audibly and she stiffened despite herself. Naruto, she started, her voice husky with a mixture of sleep, tiredness and nerves. Just sleep, Sakura-chan, he rumbled wryly. We both badly need it. And you will not go at the hospital this morning, he added after a short pause as she mutely teetered on a stay or flight mode. Anticipating that she was about to protest, he firmly insisted, Hokage's order, Sakura-chan. We need you fully powered back. Now sleep, he finished almost imperiously. Sakura immediately bristled and grunted in annoyance. Since when had he come so bossy and so, words failed her tired mind. She had to admit, though, that a couple of hours of more sleep would be more than welcome. She still needed to restore her strength, and anywhere else than this warm, wonderful haven was less than appealing. And had anything major happened, the hospital would have surely contacted Naruto. His warmth was just so encompassing, his rhythmic breathing lulling, and merely minutes later she felt drowsy again, her system still in acute need of rest. Naruto forced his breathing to deepen, same as he would when meditating, wanting her to be comfortable. Sure enough, her frame slowly relaxed again and soon she fell asleep again, exhaustion still in her. Naruto sighed contentedly. It was fabulous awaking in the arms of the girl of his dreams. In fact, it was one of his best waking up yet. The happy bubble was shortly tarnished, though, when the somber events of the previous day crept in his mind. Until they concluded the investigation, they had some dark days ahead of them, but in the meantime, he wanted to enjoy this tiny, delicious moment of respite that he had been granted. Soon, he too fell into a light slumber. When Sakura woke up later, she was alone and the sun was high in the sky. She could hear someone bustling in the kitchen, and a minute later, Akemi walked in the living room. Ah, Sakura-san, you're awake, Akemi exclaimed, not appearing surprised at all to see her mistress sleeping on the floor in the living room. The Hokage had already left, and had left instructions for you to rest. The following days were as hectic and dismal Naruto had foreseen for his office, leaving no time or the luxury to linger on personal comfort, as Konoha mourned the loss of two of its shinobis. The 6 surviving shinobis were all finally awake and were towards a complete recovery. Their statements were all same. They had been ambushed by a group of 3 powerful masked males, who had been very proficient in ninja arts. The surviving Junin teacher admitted that he and his now deceased colleague could barely counter the attacks, while the Genins had no chance at all. But the identities of their attackers were impossible to know, what with the masks covering their entire faces and no Hittite to suggest any affiliation with any hidden villages. Shikamaru immediately made a link of this attack with the failed attack on the morning of Naruto's and Sakura's wedding. When comparing statements, the link was confirmed, as the masks in both cases seemed to be similar. This geared the investigation towards a new route, but still though, nothing much substantial was brought forward. In both cases the masked attackers had taken much care to erase all tracks and Naruto and his team was only stumbling in the dark. Kakashi led a team to the wheat village to investigate their suspicions, but as expected, returned back without any solid evidence, a part of a gut feeling that it was indeed them behind this attack. Naruto knew that any gut feeling of Kakashi was to be taken to the utmost seriousness, and decided to keep a close eye on the village. He had already informed Gaara, the Kazekage, about the attack on his people and their suspicions, and Gaara had already replied back by giving his support on this. But since they only had speculations to go by, Naruto could not openly accuse the village, yet. So, apart from keeping a close eye on the wheat village and increasing Konoha's security, there was nothing much he could do at this stage. 2 weeks after the crisis, Sakura was faced with the reality that whatever happened, life always go on. There were always births to counter deaths, the poignant cycle, the beginning of life and the end of it. 1 week to her due date, Ino went into labor. She was brought at the hospital, at mid-morning, by a visibly overwrought Shikamaru, while Ino herself was perfectly calm and confident. It was quite a rare sight indeed, to once see Shikamaru so stressed out compared to his wife. Sakura immediately attended to the laboring young woman and it turned out to be an average-length labor for a first-timer, 6 hours. Sakura was more than happy to spend these 6 hours by her friend's side, which was nothing like the hours she usually spent in mending people back to life. There was something magical, scared even, in such a task as bringing a new being into the world. The whole labor and delivery process went smoothly, and Sakura could not help shedding a few tears of joy along with her friend as she placed the healthy, kicking and bellowing his throat out baby boy on the belly of the ecstatic mom, the dazed father looking on, a suspicious shiny sheen on his eyes. He was a beautiful baby, a tuft of dark hair on the head and dark blue-green eyes which Sakura suspected would turn lighter later, same like Ino's. But he sure would take some after his dad. Sakura laughed as after giving them a lazy, disinterested stare, the little man yawned and promptly fell asleep. And 7 days later, Sakura and Naruto was invited at the Oshichiya Maimaishiki, the naming ceremony, of the latest addition to the Nara's household. The ceremony was set for the early evening, and the whole gang of friends, along with their respective spouses and companions and children, were present. Counting in relatives of the Naras and Yamanakas, finally, it was a big, joyous crowd which ended being present. "Let us introduce you to Nara Shikio," Shikamaru announced proudly, holding the snoozing baby, all clad in the traditional white, in his arms, while a radiant but tired-looking Ino stood beside him. "Shikio." Everybody chorused, showering the baby with praises and best wishes, the gifts given to the parents. But said little man continued to contentedly sleep throughout it, not bothered by the lavish attention bestowed on him or joyous mood surrounding him. "Seems like we have another sleeper and most probably soon to be cloud watcher among us," Ten remarked. Ino sighed. "I wish he could be as accommodating during the night," she said wryly. "He had been keeping us up all nights through the week and I'm drained." Naruto peered at the tiny sleeping bundle. "This teeny-weeny thing has managed to keep you up," he exclaimed, earning a prompt whack on the arm from Sakura. "He's not teeny-weeny, he's a darling, healthy boy." At the request of Ino and Shikamaru, Sakura was the proud godmother and she intended to play her role to the hilt. Choji had been requested to be the godfather. "That he is, Sakura-chan," Naruto chuckled softly. His eyes could not help but followed her as she smiled and chatted around, simply enjoying the sight of her. They had both been working till late odd hours the past week and had barely had time to spend together. There was a solemn moment when with the utmost care, Shikamaru had to produce his best calligraphic talent to write the name on the scroll of the birth certificate, to which an exquisite ink portrait of Shikio made by Sai was annexed. Then, the celebratory, elaborated dinner, which included the two traditional, auspicious dishes of red rice and fish, was served. The adults had all flocked to the dining table while all the kids, a lot between them, were seated at another table. Ino had had the bright idea of hiring 2 genins for the evening to entertain the kids. They almost brushed with a disaster when Lee had been about to unknowingly take a sip of a sake-spiked punch. Luckily Neji noticed on time and managed to snatch the glass away before the fluid reached his mouth. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. "Neji, my good friend, so good of you to look after my well-being," cried Lee, and Ten rolled her eyes. It was one of the things they still had to carefully watch out for, that their teammate did not drink a drop of alcohol. Amidst all this, Naruto looked around, deeply glad to be among his friends. It was a bomb to be able to enjoy such times together, it was what gave him the force to go on. The last time they had all met like this had been for their wedding, almost 5 months ago now. After dinner, most of the relatives left, but at the insistence of the young Nara couple, the gang decided to linger and relaxed in the living room for a little longer. Little Shikio was finally awake and Ino offered Sakura to hold him. It was with a warm pride that Sakura looked down at her godson as she held him in her arms. The little face puckered and he wiggled lethargically, rooting towards her, a sign that he was hungry, and she chuckled. "Shikio," she cooed, catching one flailing chubby little hand tenderly in her own. She felt a warm emotion rising within her as she held the tiny being in her arms, causing a tug at her heart. She raised her head and her eyes instinctively found Naruto in the crowded room, sitting in a couch at the other end. Darkened blue eyes were watching her with the baby in her arms. It seemed for an instant, time stilled, It was as if the two of them were alone for a tiny moment in a private world as their gaze locked. Sakura felt a tremor ran down her spine. His expression was of such a raw hunger, a deep yearning that he was not bothering to hide, so open for her to see, that she was stunned. She could only stare back at him, unable to look away, breath held. Then a shudder seemed to come across his face, blanking away the emotions, and she felt as if she had surfaced from a pool. Hinata was saying something in the background and Sakura tore her gaze away and obligingly turned to reply, but she still felt shaken to the core at the blatant yearning she had seen in those blue cerulean eyes. What also shook her was her own response, as for a moment, she had imagined herself with a blonde-haired, cerulean blue-eyed baby. Naruto's baby. And hers. A real family of their own. Kiba chose that exact moment to launch one of his snickering remarks. Ha! I can imagine the next baby in the group will be a spiky blonde with blue eyes, he said, mirroring Sakura's thoughts. Or better still, a pink-haired